Hello, I'm Paul Laney, the retired sheriff from Cass County, North Dakota.
And I'm Lauren Matthews, and I'm the current social media and content specialist here at Turnkey.
And this is JailTalk. And we are coming to you from the TKC studios here in River Falls, Wisconsin. And we are privileged today to have a regular member of the show, starting to feel like you're part of our TKC family, Dr. Kimberly Miller. Good to see you.
Good to see you, War Eagle, to all my people.
So I see I have my same old coffee mug that I wear that I have every time, but I see you're wearing new Auburn stuff.
I am, and
today.
I have the regular Auburn water
Someone
bottle.
would think you like Auburn. That
I know, and I went there, might be alumni. I don't know. It's hard to say.
Yeah, exactly. Where does this come from? So, no, it's cool to see your loyalty to your school and to your team. So, a lot of us, like I said, you've been with us a number of times now. This is our third full episode with you. Our first episode was part 1, part 2. We had our second episode just a couple months back. And if you haven't seen those episodes, go back to our podcast page, go to YouTube, follow us on JailTalk, and check out those first 2. The information, as always with you, was phenomenal. Our goal is to help our law enforcement listeners, any of our organization listeners out there, that if you want to make your organization better, follow her advice. I know it helped me. I brought her to my own department back in 2015 and set the stage for my whole third term as sheriff, and I don't regret 1 second of that. So if you have a chance to do that, please go back. Today we're going to talk about some other things. Actually, let me do this, because we know you. And,
yes.
I'm just so used to talking about that, but maybe we better read your bio.
Yeah, absolutely. So Dr. Kimberly Miller is a licensed police and public safety psychologist and sought-after speaker and consultant who's been inspiring and motivating individuals in our profession for over 16 years. She owns her own consulting firm and has worked with over 150 public safety organizations and provided training for tens of thousands of students across the country through her local, regional, national, and online training programs. Her programs and services are designed to improve not only the individual line-level employee skills, but also the organization as a whole. Dr. Miller's educational background includes a bachelor's degree in psychology from Auburn University, War Eagle, a master's degree in clinical psychology from Ball State University, and a PhD in counseling psychology from Colorado State University, and she is the current president of NSA Psychological Services Board.
Another mouthful. Another time. So you got to keep coming back, and Lauren can just, by the time you've done your 5th, 6th, 7th show with us,
she'll have it memorized.
Yeah,
I won't even need this anymore.
Well, it's good for her to practice. As we talk about everything on these shows, it's always good to practice.
It is. Well, a couple months ago you were here. We talked about turning conflict into conversation.
Yes.
And as I said, very useful information. Check it out if you haven't seen it yet. What are we talking about today?
Well, sort of in the same line, in the same vein of that, we are going to talk about how to make our words an asset, not a liability, so that hopefully if we improve our day-to-day conversation, we will be less likely to get into conflict. And we were just talking before the show, and I came up with a brand new phrase, and I don't know how because I'm so tired, but this class is all about finding ways to say what you need to say in a way that can be received instead of saying what you really want to say. So think about that.
Well, I think we've all been there.
Yes.
You're having a conversation, maybe isn't the best, and I know what I really want to tell you, but I'm going to not do it that way.
Yes. And it's hard.
Very.
It's hard to create that pause in between the immediate reaction of what you really want to say and what you might fantasize about saying and what you think would be really good to say. And then creating that pause to think for a moment, step back, and make sure that your words that you strategically pick will get you to the end.
You might communicate it the way you want to say it, and it might feel good for that second, but the end result might be really bad that you did communicate it that way.
Yes. So we have to really work to think from the end and be strategic in the things that we practice and make these solidified habits so that when we are provoked and pushed and triggered, we pull from a good habit instead of the emotional tornado of reaction.
Yeah. Well, let's dig into that a little bit. And this first question might seem kind of simple, but why is communication so critical?
Well, no matter what our job is, and I think people in public safety would absolutely agree this is their job, but I don't care if you're an IT person, I don't care if you're an admin assistant, I don't care if you work in a warehouse. The reality is we are all in the people business. Mm-hmm. Now, you might be an introvert. Maybe you're the stereotypical web developer, IT person who would just as soon sit at your desk and never talk to another human because you talk better with computers and you enjoy computers better than people. But even then, you're still in the people business. You still have coworkers to talk to. You still have a supervisor to report to. And you have, whether you like it or not, a family that you go home to, that you're related to. You have friends. And this is not just a class to help you improve your professional communication. This also, the things we're going to talk about today and dive into today, is going to help your personal life. The other interesting thing that led me to create the class that all this is based on that we're going to talk about today is 86% of all office and organizational issues are tied directly to communication. Does that seem accurate, especially since you, Paul, ran an organization for years? Do you think that that's an accurate number, or do you think it's over or underestimated?
No, I think that's accurate. I mean, coming from the perspective of having run an organization, I think it's very accurate.
And I think sometimes when we get into, especially organizational conflict or organizational conversation, we want to attack a process or policy, or say the chain of command is broken or whatever. But if we really dug deep, it's a communication problem. The other challenge that I think that we have and why communication is critical, but we sort of overlook it, is it affects our physical and our mental well-being. We don't think about that, but words are power. And the words that we choose can build up and support, or they can destroy. And when you feel, and I'm thinking of one particular organization that I know about right now that's struggling a lot with communication, their employees are stressed out every moment when they come in the building. They stress eat. They get exhausted by the time they go home. They say they don't have time to work out. They don't sleep well because they're stressed out about what happened at work and what the conversation is at work, and they don't want to go back to work. And people don't think about that. They don't connect the dots in understanding that the words that we pick affect our mental and our physical health. And words matter. And we all need to just be more intentional with our communication.
Mm-hmm. I've always tried to pride myself on being a good communicator, and I'm one of those that's the opposite of the example you used of the computer person. I would just assume, work with the computer. I need people. I'm a people person. I've always been a people person. I strive to pride myself on being a communicator, but like as we shared in the last episode a couple months ago, where I talked about how sometimes I overly communicate. As I promised last time, it helped me, even with years of experience of doing this. I thought, I got to communicate this differently. But why is communication so hard? Whether you're the introvert or you're the extrovert, which I am certainly the other end of the scale. Why is it so hard?
So I'm going to put that back on y'all to start with. Because y'all,
why does she always do that?
I know. It's her favorite thing to do.
It is. So I want to know from y'all, in your personal experience as being a communication deliverer and a communication receiver, why do y'all think that communication? And then once you share, I promise I'll share too.
You go first.
I think a lot of times people come to conversations, good or bad, one-sided. And I think they're looking for what they can get out of it rather than what they can give to it. Mm-hmm. And so then, when people leave a conversation, if they're both trying to just take and take and neither one of them's giving, nobody gets what they want from it. It's not any teamwork of you need this, how can I help you get there? Mm-hmm. It's more, what can I take from it? And obviously that makes any conversation hard because you're not really getting anywhere.
Yeah, and it's interesting. A lot of people don't think they're selfish. Mm-hmm. We're all selfish. Let's be honest. We want what we want. We want it our way.
When we want it, now.
Yes. And we don't self-reflect enough to think about what you just said. Like, am I coming to this conversation? I have my own agenda. I have my own perspective. Of course, I'm right and everybody else is wrong. I'm going to convince. And we show up to either tell or take instead of give. So that's brilliant. What do you think?
I think I look at it in a couple of things. Some, I talked about it a little bit in the last one where I think it touches a little bit on what Lauren said is you a lot of times come in, you don't listen to hear, or you listen so that you can argue or debate. You want to listen so that you can strike back, or you want to listen to so you can convince them why they're wrong. Mm-hmm. The other part of it is I think a lot of people, why it's so hard to communicate, people come at it from different perspectives. Some people come at it from an arrogance and ego standpoint, my way or the highway. Some people come at it from an insecurity standpoint, and because of that, they lash out, or maybe they say something because they're not comfortable with the conversation and they're insecure, and some people fold and cry, and some people lash out and say something very hurtful. Mm-hmm. So I think learning to communicate is one of the hardest things. And as law enforcement leaders, I think one of the most important things it is for us, whether you're that line level sergeant, even just line level people together who are working together, it's so important to learn how to communicate effectively and use the appropriate words and have that confidence to do that, all the way up to the sheriff or the chief. I think you need to be able to communicate to your people, because if you don't, it starts at the top. I mean, at any given point in time, I knew in my organization, I had 200 plus employees, and the buck stopped with me. Mm-hmm. And people emulate their leader, and people, will communicate like their leader, and they'll start to model their leader. So if you're a great communicator, you expect that, and you challenge your organization to grow, and you challenge them and bring in the right kind of trainings and the right kind of things, you can become effective communicators. If you are it's my way or the highway, because I told you so, because you know what, I have these, you're going to have problems. Mm-hmm. And so I think it's all of that. Big, long-winded answer to your question, but I think it's a lot of dynamics that go into how people communicate.
Yeah, and I think it's really interesting that you say that as the leader of the organization, the CEO level, that the buck stops with you and it's your responsibility. I can't tell you how unfortunate throughout my 16 years I've heard people say, well, that's not my problem. I communicate fine. It's everybody else. Well, if it's your organization and they're not communicating well, and you just say that's not my problem and then push it off on other people, who's going to fix it then? Because if people under you are not doing it right, or they don't know, or they haven't been held accountable, and you don't come in and be the coach and the guider, and I don't know how it ever gets fixed. I don't know how it doesn't stay broken. I don't know if you've seen other organizations or tried to mentor people in different organizations that have that same dynamic. Like they say, it's not my issue, but they don't ever fix it.
Definitely, in my years and the things I've learned and some of the exposures I've had, and, being in the different positions I was brought in, I've done leadership training, both in the law enforcement world and externally. And you definitely see that. And it's very interesting when you go into an organization and you start really listening to what they have to say. You can kind of start picking out very quickly where some of the issues are, and where they are, and who they are, and then can, I think, start developing an action plan. And I think every organization has to ask themselves, are we ready to be better communicators? Are we ready to listen? And you have to put, I said it last time, I say it again, and I'll say it 100 times in my career, put your ego and your pride in your back pocket and make yourself better. Yeah. And that might mean your entire organization. That might mean you, as the leader of the organization, need to suck up your pride, put it in your back pocket, and make your organization better. You promised you'd do that when you took the job. You promised that you took that responsibility when you got promoted, or you said, I'm going to be the sheriff or the chief, or I want to be the sheriff or the chief. And so I think, yes, I've definitely seen it in organizations. And at the same time, too, I don't think I'm all that in a box of chocolates by any means. I think you constantly have to push yourself to grow. You constantly have to make yourself better. And even if you accomplish this goal, well, you can't get stagnant either. You got to constantly push your organization to be better, right? And with some balance.
So that brings me to one of my favorite phrases ever. So everybody write this down, including y'all. Write it on your paper. This will change your life. People do what you allow. And we can just stop right now and just wrap this up.
All right, thank you for coming. Well, maybe we want to dive into that a little further.
A little more. But I see that because what you said spoke to me so strongly is if you don't own it at the CEO level, and you say that's not my issue, and people have negative ways of interacting, or they're dismissive of each other, or you have somebody in your chain of command that I will call the information horde, the buck stops there, but nobody under them knows anything. They're not given information. If you don't fundamentally say, we're fixing this at the CEO level, you don't say, this is unacceptable. You don't bring that person in your office or tell them, their supervisor to bring the person in the office and say, you've got to have a conversation. They can't be the information whore. They have to pass information freely down the chain of command so our people know what's going on. They're going to keep doing it. And I want you to think about that broadly. Whatever you have going on in your organization, and yes, today is about words and communication, but whatever goodness is happening, that's getting allowed, that's getting reinforced. And whatever badness is happening, that's getting allowed and that's getting reinforced. It all comes down to culture. And when you sit at the CEO level, you have to be the culture owner, right? You have to own it. Now, the way everybody else fits in it, all of you that are probably listening to this in your line level, and you're like, well, I don't own the culture, so I don't have work. No. Everybody in the organization has work, because everybody in the organization every day in what you do and what you don't do, when you speak up, when you ignore, we're all creating culture every day with every choice we make. And today we're going to talk about how to create culture, a better culture, with being intentional about the words that you use and how you communicate. So I know that's a lot, and it's heavy, and it's deep, and it's profound. But I wanted to give you that as a framework. Mm-hmm. And remember, and this trickles down into individual communication.
Absolutely.
If you let somebody yell and scream at you and treat you with disrespect, they're going to do that. If you set a boundary and go, oh, you're not talking to me like that. I'm happy to have a conversation with you, Lauren, about our relationship and how we can get better. But I'm not going to do it when you yell and scream at me. Let me know when you're in a different emotional place. We can have a conversation. But people treat you the way you teach them they can. And so this class is about self-reflecting. It's about owning your stuff. And it's about realizing that you have the power to transform culture and communication in your organization at any level. It's about owning it when you're at the CEO level. And it's also owning what you allow in your personal life, how you let people treat you.
I think, too, one of the things you talked about where, you're going to have a lot of our listeners out there, and I hope right now they're kind of engaged going, okay, I can't wait to hear the next thing. But I think one of the things that I really had to try to get across to my people and to my commanders was, yes, it's my responsibility at the end of the day, but it's we. Mm-hmm. It's our responsibility. Mm-hmm. So you can't just sit there and go, well, I'm the CEO. It's not my problem to communicate. Well, it is your problem to communicate. It's either to communicate to your CEO and to be a productive member of that team and to help the place get stronger, or to bring into the environment you can control, whether that environment is just you mm-hmm. or a team of whoever's assigned to you. It is your responsibility to communicate and to communicate effectively and use the right words. That's what builds a culture. Mm-hmm. Is everybody working together. That's how you change a culture. Yes, it's the responsibility of the man or the woman at the top, absolutely, to be that vision, to be that pursuer of that, to set the road, set the tone, set the expectations. But it's every one of your responsibilities, just like it's my responsibility mm-hmm. to get it done and to get it done positively.
Absolutely. So as promised, I will give you some of my ideas about why I think communication is hard, and I'm going to go off what Paul said in a minute. Number one issue, we lack training. So if you think about when you're growing up and you started in kindergarten and maybe even preschool and on through your educational journey, how many of y'all took a communication class or a conflict resolution class that was required to graduate, not an elective, and it doesn't count if you're a comm major, right? Sorry, doesn't count. But if you are a regular person not majoring in comm, how many of y'all had to take a required class in learning how to communicate, learning how to deliver difficult messages, learning how to, right? I didn't either. It was an elective at Auburn for me, a psychology major. It wasn't required. And isn't that interesting? As a psychology major and now as a licensed psychologist, I had to take 0 required courses to get a doctorate and get a license. Now that is scary. Mm-hmm. Now, it doesn't mean we didn't take therapeutic classes and group facilitation classes and in that curriculum, obviously learn how to communicate and read people. Like that was all part of it. But you think about even the undergraduate education, when you're getting a degree in basically humans, why we were not mandated to take it. It's crazy.
Mm-hmm.
So I think our basic flaw as humans is we didn't learn how to do this. And what do we end up doing when we don't take formal classes and we're not held accountable to practice that stuff? Then we default to our family dynamics. We default to whoever our role models are, good or bad. And we also default to something we talked about in the last class. We default to our strengths and weaknesses. And so for me, I talked about last time, I overused perseverance and honesty. So I used to just be me. God bless me. And I just beat people up with the truth, and it was bad. And that ties into ego because I thought I was fine. The message I got growing up is, don't be different. Be who you are. God put you on this planet to be you. Don't pretend. Don't fake it. Be exactly who you are. And I'm like, well, bring it on. Hold on. Here's the honesty and here's the perseverance.
Here comes Kimberly.
It's bad. And that gets into ego with what you said, Paul. It was not in my back pocket for years. I did not practice humility. I thought my way was a good way. I thought people that weren't open and didn't embrace the beat them in your face truth, there was something fundamentally wrong with them. But of course, what I learned over time is no one responds well to that.
Right.
And it is my responsibility to keep my ego in check and not say, and I still hear people in leadership roles say it all the time, well, this is just how I am. This is just how I communicate.
Take it or leave it.
Yes. It's unbelievable. It's unbelievable. I used to say that. And it's unbelievable so many other people still say it. And I've heard so many supervisors say, it's my people's responsibility to adapt to me. I am not going to adapt to them. And I'm like, wow. And you will not be effective with anybody unless they're just like you. And I've really worked in my life to communicate in the way that people need to receive it. I've learned to change my goal from being proud of myself because of how I did it, right? Ego. And also being very efficient. I pride myself on effectiveness and efficiency. But too often when I communicated before, I would sacrifice effectiveness for efficiency. I would focus just on shooting that message out. And I was like, well, hope you got it. And if not, it's your fault. So then I never self-reflect. I never had to get better. So that was a huge problem for me. And the second piece of that is I always sought data in the environment to confirm what I already believed. So that further feeds into ego because if I'm only looking for data to prove I'm right, I'm going to find that all the time.
Mm-hmm.
And then I don't have to change and I don't have to modify. And so, Lauren, I'm interested in your perspective of the younger generation who is really adding so much to our workforce these days. What are your just initial reactions to hearing that some people still say, I'm not adapting to people I lead, and if you don't like it, that's your issue, and if you didn't hear it right, that's your problem. What do you think that people in your generation, how would that work for them at all or not?
I don't think so. At least for me, if I came into an organization and that was kind of their mindset, I don't want to work for you. I mean, and that's a problem because my generation is becoming a big chunk of the workforce. Mm-hmm. And if nobody wants to work for you, well, what are you going to do? You know, you have to be willing to, you can have your opinions, you can have obviously your own thoughts, but if you're not willing to learn from maybe someone who's younger than you or adapt at all, you're just not going to have anyone to work for you. You're not going to have a solid team and you're not going to have a good organization.
And I think it's harder and harder to recruit in law enforcement these days, Paul. I think the things that have been going on in the world, and prior to what's been going on in the world, I think it's been harder to pull in good people to this organization. And I think that we have to talk more about the communication style and really the overall environment that our words create for our people.
Totally, and it's only going to get harder as things go on, where people look at that and say, "Why would I go into that profession?"
Mm-hmm.
When it's still, to me, one of the most amazing professions on the planet. We could totally make a difference, and I was interesting listening to what Lauren just said and what you talked about, how you can just say, my people don't have to change. I mean, I don't have to change for my people; they have to change for me. And I always talk in my leadership classes about a way and the way.
Oh, that's good.
And that's a way of doing it. And yes, you can do it that way. And if that's your insecurities, that's the only way you do what I say. It's my way or the highway. You can do all that. And you'll have an environment, and you'll have a job, and you'll have what's your culture and what's your work environment like? And when you talk about organizations that are successful and agencies that are successful, where people want to come to work, and especially in law enforcement right now, where the dynamics are so hard of trying to get people in, you want to have that culture where they want to be there, because if you're not providing it, they'll go somewhere else. That's one thing about this younger generation. Mm-hmm. They're not afraid to switch jobs. They're not afraid to go try something else. And if you're not going to give them what they need fulfilling, instead of looking at it like, well, my way or the highway, well, guess what? It's going to be the highway, and you're going to be short the people. And so maybe we got to look at it, and that's something I always challenge my people. You still got to set your boundaries, and you still got to set the road and your expectations within the organization and hold everybody accountable. And sometimes that's with tough love, and sometimes that's with encouragement. You got to know when to wrap your arms around and carry them, and sometimes you got to know when to kick dead in the backside. Mm-hmm. But it's all for a purpose and a reason, and that ability to communicate and challenge yourself. So as leaders, as effective leaders, we have to step back and ask ourselves, how can I get better? And maybe it's taking that second and challenging yourself to understand your younger generation. Mm-hmm. When I was, a sheriff of that bit, then it was the millennials. It was those darn millennials, And it's funny when you look back. I saw a quote once where they were talking about the younger generation. They don't respect their elders. They don't do that. And I think, and they say, who said that? Everybody said, it was Plato.
Right.
Talking about
right.
So, we've all been like that. And I'm sure when we were kids, our parents, the boomers were all like, oh, that Gen X. I'm the first year of Gen X. Those Gen Xers, we are in trouble in this country, and then it's the millennials, and now it's the Gen Zers. And I think knowing that, and if you're going to be an effective leader and a solid leader, open your own mind and step back and say, how can I understand my workforce better? How can I communicate to them better?
Right.
And so we're never perfect. I mean, like I said, I'm not sitting here, as I always say, all that in a box of chocolates. I like to think I've been that person over the years, but even like we talked about earlier, there's, how I communicate. I've got to still look in the mirror and say, I can be better.
Right.
And we have to be better, and we have to learn to communicate to our people and demand that within your ranks, demand that in your organizations, that your expectation is we are going to get better, and we are going to find the right ways to communicate. So we're the organization they all want to come to.
Right.
We're the organization that wants to be the role model, not the one they're all exiting from.
Right. Right. So that brings me to a totally different thought, and I'll eventually get back on track. But that brought me to the idea of, how do you lead? And I will put it into two categories. Do you lead from influence, or do you lead from rank and power? Because in my mind, you got two choices, right? There's different leadership styles and how you get there, but you either lead with rank and power and say it's my way or the highway, like you were saying, or you lead with influence because you do spend the time to get to know your people. You do find ways to adapt and meet people's needs, even if they're not your needs. Mm-hmm. And you really build relationship. And in my opinion, you're building relationship one word at a time, one conversation at a time, one experience that you create at a time. And that's another reason that I think communication is absolutely critical, because our nonverbals, our verbals, our body posture, our face, it all makes a difference. And it all sends a message about, do I value you? Are you not valued? Do I respect you? Are you not respected? And I think a barrier in creating the experiences we need to obtain the influence we want is technology. Now, back when Paul and I grew up, there was very limited technology. There were 3 channels. We were the remote control.
We were the remote controls.
And the national anthem played, usually after Carson, and the TV went off. And then there was
snow.
Yeah.
Or a picture of the American flag until 6 a.m.
Right. And that was it. And then our only other electronic device was Atari that changed the world.
Pong.
Totally wrong. But if you think of where we are today, and you think we're talking about my niece prior to, which I love her, she's amazing. We were talking about her, and she communicates very differently than I do. She is going to be 20 in a few months, and she's different. She would rather text me. That bugs me to death. I want to talk to her on the telephone, but I'm like, you know what? She doesn't always want me to call her. Now, sometimes I still do. I'm that older. Okay, you text me. What you doing? She's like, why did you call me? I'm like, because I love you. I want to hear your voice. But sometimes communication can be a barrier because we did not grow up the same. We did not have technology at our fingertips. We didn't freaking have computers. We didn't have anything. And that's the other challenge is that even the old fogies like Paul and I sometimes rely on texts when a call would be better. And sometimes we call when a text would be sufficient. Mm-hmm. And we sometimes forget who wants a call and who might prefer a text.
And who communicates better that way.
Right.
Maybe in that particular moment.
Right. And so that's another dynamic that I think makes communication hard and we have to be more intentional about. Because remember, on text and on email, you do not get intention. You do not get nonverbals. You do not get tone of voice. You cannot figure out emotion. And so if it is really important, you better do it at minimum on the phone, but ideal is face-to-face. If it's something quick and it's no big deal, like one of our colleagues was talking about, honey, instead of calling me, can you just text me what I need to get at the store? Like, that would make sense because it's a list. You don't want a phone call because you're driving to the grocery store. No, a text. And that seems simple. But we all need to be more intentional about the method of delivery. Because we sometimes punish people, personally and professionally, when they have a negative reaction to an email or text. What's wrong with you? I just sent you a text. And you're like, and it wasn't nice. I'm like, yeah, it was. And you're like, no, it wasn't. And now we get into a conflict.
Yeah.
About a text and it explodes when it didn't need to. But we're not often as strategic about that. So I hate to put the burden on you. But
she's going to anyway.
I am. I do this all the time.
You do, often.
So what's your advice about navigating technology across generations? Because you don't only, I'm not picking on you just because you're the younger generation, but you also have to communicate in some ways that you think is absolutely crazy to the old fogies.
Yeah.
So what's your advice about that?
I think you just have to have an open mind about it because, there are times even like we bought a laptop for my grandma and she was like, no, I don't like it. I want my desktop. I don't even want to, it was an iPad. And she had a laptop and she just wanted nothing to do with it, wouldn't even try. She took one look at it and said, heck no. And so I think just being open-minded and even willing to adapt as you go through your life, like to the young generation, like give the older generation a break also. Like we grew up with it. It's easy for us, but it's not easy for everyone. Right. And the way people communicate is just different. Even coming into the workforce, like I came from in college, you have a group project, you don't call anyone in your group project, you just have a group text and you text your way through it. Now it's like, Paul will just give me a quick call and be like, blah, 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 this, and then it's done. And it's kind of like, we didn't have to text for 20 minutes back and forth.
Right.
Figuring it out. It was just a quick phone call and it's done. So I think the biggest thing is just having an open mind to whatever situation that you're in.
Yeah. And I appreciate what you said about your grandmother. I think about my mamaw. And if y'all are from the South, you probably have a mamaw and a papaw. But for my mamaw, we wanted her to get more efficient and be able to have an answering machine. And we also wanted to help her have a, what do you call them? The wireless. They're not called wireless. What are they called? The phones, the landlines. Help me, I feel old. The things where you...
Cordless. Yeah, are you looking for cordless?
Right? Oh, I'm tired. I'm sorry. Oh my God. Yeah, the thing that's not on the wall. Yes.
Here we go.
Lord, bless my heart. Okay. So we wanted to help her, right? And so we wanted to get her a cordless phone attached to an answering machine. Yeah, that lasted 2 weeks, and she's like, I want my rotary phone. And we're like, Mama. And this was like in 2000. She's like, I want. Okay, there will not be any answer machine. She doesn't want one, and we will have a rotary phone.
Mm-hmm.
And we have to make it ring 20 times before she could get to the phone, but we just hang on, and it would happen.
Didn't know when that was happening. Yeah.
Right. And we were really frustrated with her for a while, but you saying that, so we had to eventually get to a place of grace. Is this what works for her? And we are dragging her to our comfort level, which is not okay.
Mm-hmm.
Which is not okay. So that's a lot that we started with in the very beginning. Are y'all just totally overwhelmed?
No, I think this is excellent information.
Perfect. Yeah. And so obviously we all need a little help with our communication.
Yes.
I think that's just across the board. Anyone can use help with their communication. So what are ways that we can improve our communication?
So I'll bet you got one or two.
How much time do we have to do this? So the first would be, because we've all got negative feedback in our lives about how we communicate. My first question to everybody would be, if you want to get better at communication, what have people told you for years that you've never changed? That's the first step. Now, we don't want to look at that because we think we're fine. Mm-hmm. We think everybody else is the problem. But if you're listening or watching right now, I want you to write down, what are things people have told you for years that are a problem that you haven't either fully fixed or you hadn't fixed at all because you don't think it's a problem? That's your problem. So for me, sometimes when I get very enthusiastic or very, very passionate, which is pretty much my default in the universe, I can sometimes get so passionate, I interrupt people. And I don't even know I'm doing it, but I'm so excited. I want to talk. And I interrupt people and people go, okay, yeah, please stop. And I'm like, well, I didn't do anything. They're like, you interrupted me 5 times and you rode right over me with your train of passion. So it doesn't mean I can't be passionate, but it means I need to temper it. And when I see that someone wants to say something back to me, instead of going, and here's 5 other things that I love, I have to say, and so what do you think? What's your perspective? And let them share before I give them more passion. And then sometimes I just have to keep my mouth shut because people don't like the passion. So that's one thing for me. I don't know if y'all, this is very much putting you on the spot. I don't know if y'all can think of anything, but that's my first recommendation. What have people already given you feedback on that you haven't fixed or haven't addressed? Do y'all have any thoughts?
I could jump on one here, and even different from the I talked about the communication one where, you definitely have to self-assess some of that. One of the things for me is, I've lived and breathed the badge. I lived and breathed the fact that I had the privilege to do this and to serve my community, both when I wore blue and then when I wore brown. And I thought, my whole philosophy was service and sacrifice before self. An 18-hour day, I didn't care. I got to stay here for 2 shifts, and as I went up through the ranks, you start to, what do you mean you don't think like that? You want to do your 9 hours and then go home and do this or do that, or you want your, I'll never accept, okay, you're going to do 4 hours out of an 8-hour day. That's unacceptable. Right. You give me a hard 9. But I had to learn as I went up through the ranks that not everybody looked at our profession with the same passion and commitment that I did. Now it worked for me and it helped. I rose through the ranks and I went a lot of places with my career, but I had to learn that with some, it was okay. As long as they gave me a hard shift and they gave me a hard 9 hours or whatever it was, whatever our shifts were at the time, that was okay. And if they came back and they went off and maybe they liked to go camping or they were coaching softball or they were, and they were like, no, I really not want to do overtime. And now there's times you have to. I get all that. I'm not talking, there's always those times where you have to stay because you're all we got.
Right.
But those were the times where it was like, I had to understand not everybody looked at it the way I did. Because I'm like, what do you mean you don't want to stay for 18 hours? Come on, and it took me a while as I got older and wiser. And it's like, okay, I had to understand that. So I think that's an example I could use.
Any in your life where you've seen people where you've given them feedback and they haven't changed anything?
I think just at the very basics of communication, my sister and I both do this. And it's why we communicate really well is because when we get going on something, we talk like 1,000 miles an hour. So fast. And for us, it works because we can understand the other one. But my parents would just like watch us and like, okay, you need to slow down. Like, I don't know what's going on. And so that's just a problem in communication in general, because then you come to the workforce and, you know, no matter what workforce you're in, if you're talking 1,000 miles an hour, people are like, what is going on?
Right.
And, you know, my sister and I have both been told that for years. And I think we're both becoming more aware of it, but, and trying to change it. But, you know, as kids, you keep doing it.
Right.
But.
Right. No, that's perfect. So what I want you to do is look at your list that you wrote down and find just one thing, just one way you can work on it, make a small move. So the next thing I want y'all to write down and how you get better is triggers. So what are the things that trigger you the most? And we're all going to take turns on this. So one thing that triggers me is when people do this. And I'm like, what? Have you lost your mind? Like, that is just this thing that gets all over me around, I don't like what you're saying, and rolling the eyes and shaking the head. And it's actually not a word. Because remember, this is about verbal and nonverbal communication. That gets all over me. And I have the hardest time not responding to that little disgusting shaking of the head and the rolling of the eyes. And so I've had to learn that when I see that, take a breath, and I always say, just bless your heart in my head. I never say it out loud. And those are, I'm like, I want to kill you and bless your heart, and I'm going to find something good to say, or nothing at all, perhaps. But that is a big trigger for me, and I still have to really watch that. When y'all reflect in your own life, are there verbal or nonverbal triggers that still now get y'all these days?
I think going off that, when I'm having like a serious like face-to-face conversation with someone and they're like on their phone or they're doing something else, and you're like, okay, we're having an intense conversation, at least act engaged, you know, like give me something. But when someone, it makes you feel like whatever you're bringing to the conversation just isn't important because they're focused on something else on their phone or out the window or whatever it is.
That is huge. And I see so many people in our society today of all generations. They'll do that. They'll be like, yeah, I'm listening. I'm a police officer. I can multitask. Maybe. But you're also sending the message that right now,
it really doesn't matter to me.
Yes.
Interestingly enough, okay, 23 and 53, I was going to say the same thing.
Wow.
I was going to say the same thing. I didn't know that's what she was going to say when you throw it. I'm going to throw out that if you're on your phone or you're looking through something or you're, you know, and I'm trying to engage with you and we're trying to talk, and all of a sudden you're just doing this, and I'm, hey, I'm right here.
Mm-hmm.
Right.
You know, sometimes they don't realize they're doing it. I don't think in most cases they're not trying to be that indifferent. They don't have the time. I mean, if you're that obvious to like a peer or to your supervisor that you're doing it on purpose, there's a bigger problem about to happen. But I think a lot of times we get so used to having to multitask on that that we forget that communication is engagement and sometimes eye contact, and that those verbal body languages. And because I'm like you, and that'll trigger me big time.
Yeah.
And then that's where you start that whole catalyst. Okay, am I going to compound this, or do I? Hey, can I have your attention for a minute?
Right.
You know, because you saw my initial when I said that, because I've done that. Like, hey, I'm right here.
Right.
Well, that didn't help either.
Right.
You know, so it kind of really emphasizes it. So I thought that was interesting that you have two generations here, 20 years apart. I was going to say the exact same thing.
And that's a great tool of can you pay attention? You're sort of helping them redirect. Another thing that you could say is now not the best time for us to talk?
Mm-hmm.
And don't say it with sass in the voice. Is now not a good time for this conversation? No. But you could say, is now not a good time? It seems like you're distracted, or it seems like you have something important that you're trying to address, and you can give them the space. You know what, Paul, I don't mean to be disrespectful, but you're right. Right now, I am so focused on can you give me 10 minutes? And then I can give you my full attention. Mm-hmm. And then other times, people don't even know they're doing it. And you think, oh, I'm sorry. And here's a clue. Putting your phones face up is not more polite. Put it face down and turn the ringer off, especially if it's an important conversation. Turn the ringer off, turn on vibrate, whatever. But people, it's so funny. I go to like restaurants or I see people at conferences, and they'll both sit down and they'll both put their phones right here. And I'm like, what message are you immediately sending to each other is if something happens on the phone, I'm done with you. And
another dynamic that I've noticed, and I big time noticed it when I was a sheriff, and you're in these command meetings or you're in meetings with a whole bunch of people from different organizations. Maybe you're planning a flood meeting, or you're at we were a multi-state, multi-county dispatch center, so we get together and have different meetings, and so there's just a lot of different times you're there, and the addition of the cell phone. Mentally, people, when they got a phone call, you'd be in the middle of a meeting. Why does that phone call mean you have to leave the room and go take it now?
Right.
Because before cell phones, they would ring on your desk and you get the message when you got back. But there's like this mental thought that if I get a call in the middle of this meeting, it's more important than the meeting I'm in because they're calling me now and I got to take it. Why is that? And I really noticed that over the years that I actually saw one time a commissioner get out of a commission meeting and walk out the door because her phone rang. And I was like, really? That just happened. It was a pretty, intense conversation, and so the message sent was like, wow. And I happen to know a little bit of the background. It wasn't critical. I know a little bit. I'm not going to out that person or say anything with that, but I'm just going to say I know more of that. And it was a call. Just it wasn't important. It wasn't like somebody was in the hospital or anything like that. It was. And so, I mean, granted, I'm putting some judgment on there, but that was the message sent to all of us when I saw that happen. And I've wondered that over the years that, maybe there's something where you're like, you sit down at the meeting like, hey, I have a family member in the hospital and the surgeon's going to call. Right. I have to take this. Please do not be offended if I leave. Right. But I've seen people in the middle of a conversation just get up and walk out of the room to take the call. Yeah. Why is that? There's a communication research study right there in itself because of the message it sends.
Yeah, and when I think about that, and I've seen that way too much myself, when I see that, it is, because remember, we've talked about this, I think, in the first class, we all just do our programming 24/7. That's all. We think we have free will. No. We all just do our programming. And what has changed in our society from the decades we were growing up into now is we are an on demand right now, give it to me now, respond right now. Yeah, culture. Mm-hmm. And we have created these expectations, and we remember people do what you allow. Remember what I told y'all? I said, write it down. When you train people that you are available 24/7, period, they expect you to be able to be available 24/7 on demand whenever they want, period. We train people about that. Now, of course, in law enforcement, yes, y'all work 24/7, but every human that works in your agency doesn't need to be available 24/7. That's part of the problem and the barrier related to our first couple episodes around wellness. If you tell everyone in your chain of command you have to be available 24/7, they will never have wellness. They will never be able to enjoy their vacation. They will never be able to have time off. Every time they get an email, they're going to feel like they have to be on vacation doing their email. So what you said before, lead from the top, you've got to set the expectation. When you're on vacation, you're on vacation. Go have your vacation. There's plenty of people who are still at work that know how to fix it, whatever it is. And of course, it's a major incident or somebody dies, then we'll get in touch with you. But outside of that, do not be on your email. Do not respond immediately. And I love what you said. If you've got an issue, you have something happening in your family, tell people up front. Say, I do have a family problem. The only thing I will respond to is the family problem. Right. And then you set that as an expectation. And I'll tell you one chief I worked with, and a few chiefs have done some semblance of this strategy. But when I was doing day-long meetings in their organization, they told their people ahead of time, if you have a family issue, they need to call the admin assistant. And then the admin assistant will walk down the hall and get you. If there's any urgent thing about anything, the admin assistant will come get me. So we're all going to he bought a basket. He said, as soon as you walk in the door, the phones go in the basket. You can look at your phone on break. If you need to step out of the room and use the restroom, you can grab your phone and look as you go down the hall and come back. But when you're in this room, the phone's in the basket. If there is an urgent matter, the admin assistant has all your family's numbers. They know to call her. She is doing her lunch at the desk today. So if there's an issue, she's going to come tell us there's an issue. But outside of that, you're not going to be on your phone. And I was like, you are amazing. He's like, people act like this is hard to do.
Mm-hmm.
You set up the person who's going to come tell you if there's an issue. That's when you know you need to get on your phone. But outside of that, all the family, all the work people know that she's the contact for the next 4 days.
Mm-hmm.
He goes, it's not really that hard. But we have trained people
Mm-hmm.
that were on-demand, instantaneous feedback. And I think that's something to think about, not only in your organization, but in your personal life. And I'm not here to say that any of you have to run your world like that chief ran those meetings. It's an example that it is possible, that you can set boundaries and you can create new expectations.
It's a way.
It's a way. It's not the way.
Right.
But you should have seen the look on the employees' faces when they're like, what? We can't have our phones with us? He's like, yes, I know you think it's surgically implanted and that you won't be able to live without it as it sits in the basket.
Mm-hmm.
But it sent a super strong message is that what we're doing in here is so important. I need your full attention. And you don't get to be in this distracted space. So that's huge. And that's a little off the topic, but I think it's relevant because people in all organizations are faced by that. And another thing just to think about, sort of what Paul was saying, he was talking about getting up and leaving, that do you allow people in a meeting to sit here like this? I wouldn't. If it's so urgent that you have to do that, then step out of the room. That's my role when I teach. If something is life and death and you've got to address it, then get up and leave the room and go fix it and then come back. But if I just see you sitting on your phone, I'm going to ask you to put your phone down because it's disrespectful to me as the instructor. It's disrespectful to everybody else who's trying to listen. And you send the message you don't care and you don't want to be there. If you don't want to be there, bless your heart, leave. I have better things to do than worry about you sitting in my class on the phone. I want you to go.
And distracting everybody else.
Right. But people don't think about that because it is standard and normative in our culture to be in a conversation and be on your phone or typing an email. It's bad. It's